We're going to look at World War I in this video here. And remember that in the AP US History exam, they're not going to focus on battles and generals. At least it's extremely unlikely to see anything like that. It's best to actually ignore that. And you probably noticed in your textbook there might have not been even anything in terms of battles of World War I, your AP US History textbook. I'm just going to hit some major points on World War I. And why did the U.S. enter, World War I? Woodrow Wilson, our president, campaigned on peace, talked about peace. He ran for re-election on peace, and eventually he's going to decide that in order to be able to shape the peace after the war, he's going to have to get involved. But what are some of the main reasons why Americans slowly turned around from wanting to stay out of the war to wanting to get involved? Business. A lot of our businesses had been selling. We did more business with Britain and France than we did with the Central Powers. Germany, the Ottoman Empire, the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and a lot of money was owed by Britain and France, to American companies, and there was some belief that in order to be able to pay back these debts, Britain and France would have to win. Culturally, we were far more similar to Britain and France and democracies. Even with Britain having a constitutional monarchy, there's still the Parliament, the House of Commons, and all that with the elections, and some more similar religion-wise, perhaps, than with like the Central Powers and the Ottoman Empire. Which is predominant religion's Islam, and just culturally, we had a lot more cultural connections with the Allies. A lot of ships had been sunk. 1915, you get the Lusitania, which is sunk, although it's a British ship, and Germany did advertise that they were going to try to sink it. But 128 Americans were on board. It wasn't public knowledge at the time that a lot of these boats were carrying munitions to be sold to Britain and France to be used against Germans, and in the German minds, therefore it's a fair target. But it was a passenger boat, and over 1,000 civilians died. 128 American civilians died on it. Germany did advertise in American newspapers, we will target this boat. This boat is going into a war zone. But nonetheless, that got a lot of Americans upset. But it still took well over a year before he actually declared war. So, but the violation of neutral shipping rights with the submarines, the Zimmerman Note, where Germany basically sends a wire telegram to Mexico, and Britain intercepts it, gives it to America, and it basically claims, hey, look, if America gets involved in this war going on in Europe, we will send you money and some other support that we can for you to reclaim some territory against America out west. Remember, the Mexican-American War saw Mexico lose a lot of land to the United States, and you can get that back, and we'll give you some financial assistance to get that back. There's a lot of propaganda being put out by the American government eventually too, after the war kind of gets going in Europe for a while, and America slowly starts to realize that it might be in its interest to get involved. There's just a lot of propaganda put out. And then finally, the resumption of unlimited submarine warfare, where Germany's going to just indiscriminately attack boats in the war zone. This helps turn public opinion kind of in favor of getting involved in this war. So these are some of the main causes. But Wilson, and there are also some other incidents like the Black Tom event, where German operatives were suspected of causing sabotage, and a few other ones. But Wilson, he even made a speech at one point when he was trying to keep us out of the war. He says, literally he says, too proud to fight. And a lot of his detractors, like to hearken on those words, too proud to fight, saying that Wilson's leaving us unprepared for the war. In fact, the people opposing Wilson, trying to get us involved in the war, start this preparedness movement. We need to be more prepared. And they attack Democrats, and they attack people who are trying to keep us out of this war. A lot of Irish in the big cities want to stay out of the war. You remember, they're strongly opposed to Britain because Britain had taken over Ireland, and you have the Easter Uprising in 1916 in Dublin. That Wilson himself actually campaigns for re-election on peace. He runs for re-election in 1916, November 1916, saying, I kept us out of the war, I'll continue to do so. That's one of his major sticking points. However, so he wins the election in November 1916, but then I believe it's April 2nd, 1917, just a few months later, and he's going before Congress asking to declare war. And a lot of that had to do with the Zimmerman Note and the resumption of unlimited submarine warfare. Theodore Roosevelt, too, had been putting a lot of pressure on Wilson, a lot of political pressure. Theodore Roosevelt was a fairly popular president and former president at this time, and he had ran for president in 1912 against Wilson, and Wilson's first time running for president there that he won. And Theodore Roosevelt constantly saying, we need to get involved in the war, we need to get involved in the war, we need to be able to shape world events. And so Theodore Roosevelt put a lot of pressure on Wilson to start getting a little bit more prepared for the war, to start shifting in towards the war. And Wilson's going to realize that he can't end this war, which is what he would like to do. Henry Ford even has a boat he pays for to go over to Europe to try to end this war. He's completely ignored. And he realizes, to be able to shape the peace that he wants to see, he wants a peaceful world. He has this, a lot of people talk about Wilson's vision. He has a great vision, a vision for peace, a vision for harmony. And a lot of people talk about, maybe Wilson, if you want to have a peaceful world, you're going to have to get involved in this war, win the war, so you can be at the table discussing, and have a stronger say. And that helps plays a factor into it too. When you look at World War I, sometimes they talk about the labor movement here. Woodrow Wilson protects labor rights, protects workers during this time period. The government's going to try to resolve conflict between workers and management to keep the factories running smoothly for the war effort. And there's more opportunities for women and minorities in the workforce. In fact, some people say that World War I actually helps the women's suffrage movement. As more women go into work, they get more respect, they have a little bit more say, their voices carry a little bit more weight because they're so important and vital, that it starts swaying various politicians at the state level and federal level in favor of women. Right to vote. However, after World War I, a lot of this is kind of taken away in the sense that a lot of the women and minorities that had gained jobs, many of them, most of them actually end up losing their jobs to the boys returning home from overseas. Liberty bonds are sold in big numbers. The government needed money to fund the war, so people buy a bond. The bond is like think of it as like a loan to the government. The government needs more money than it has, and so to spend the more money than it's bringing in, they sell bonds to bring in more money. You basically give the government, hypothetically, $1,000 today, and then they promise at a future date, and they sell them at various year increments to pay you more than $1,000. So you see it as, I don't need my $1,000 today. It might be nice to have an investment, invest that into the government, and they'll pay me a larger amount in the future, and it's a relatively safe investment because the federal government, honors these and so forth. And the government sees it as, well, we need money now. It's worth being in debt to people buying the bonds for it. Selective Service Act, the draft. Now, both the Confederacy and the Union had a draft during the Civil War, and so here you have another draft. The Selective Service Act, and about 3 million people were drafted more people served in the military as a whole, but 3 million of them were drafted into the war. First it starts out, taking, geez, I think it was like 21 to 30-year-olds, I believe, at first, and then they expanded it to like all the way down to 18 and up to age 45. But if you're like 45, it would be more like they're looking for like a doctor or something like that, somebody with like a high-tech skill. But yeah, the Selective Service Act, and you're going to see a draft again in World War II and then later in the Vietnam War. Men still today, when they turn 18, have to register. But the War Industries Board, headed by Bernard Brock, and the National War Labor Board helps smoothline industry, what to produce, how to produce it, and protecting workers' rights to keep the workers happy, so the workers are still producing, the workers are still helping with the war effort. We don't need any strikes and stuff like that. This is part of Woodrow Wilson protecting labor rights down here. This will help do that to a bit. You even see the country getting the home front involved. In fact, you see the Food Administration, headed by future President Hoover. And he helps deal with the food and conserving food and getting food to the war-torn parts of Europe and so forth. The Committee on Public Information. And to be honest, much of this is just spitting out and producing propaganda, headed by George Creel. They had various speakers give very well-organized and well-choreographed speeches across the nation to the public about why we need to be involved in the war and how we need to fight, and how we need to organize the, all the factories and so forth. And very, very effective newsreels. So when you go into a theater, oftentimes they'll play newsreels before the movies. George Creel, the Committee on Public Information, very, very good at helping shape public opinion. The Espionage Act in 1917, and then again the Sedition Act in 1918 here. Basically, what happens here is you can be fined or even imprisoned for doing things like criticizing the war effort, doing something that might harm the country or the war effort, or any type of sabotage. But there were people, including famously Eugene Debs, who's running for president. He actually runs for president from behind bars because he criticized the World War I war effort. The following president, Warren G. Harding, is going to pardon him and let him out of prison. But and some people wonder, is this going too far? Should the citizens have the right to criticize? People like Wilson and so forth said, we're in this to win this. We have to win this. This is a very important war, and we can't have people encouraging people to, go against the draft, or encouraging people to not support this war effort or hinder the war effort in one way or the other. So, it's very, very controversial, the Espionage Act and Sedition Act, sometimes just known as the Espionage and Sedition Acts. But here's really the essence of Wilson's vision that we had briefly mentioned earlier. The 14 points. He has this 14-point speech. And he has this vision where we're not going to punish Germany harshly. Britain, France, they want to punish Germany harshly. Although it's not Germany's sole fault why this war started, they basically want Germany to take the blame, and they want harsh reparations. Basically, they want tough economic constraints put on Germany, war reparations, payments sent to Britain and France. And Woodrow Wilson doesn't want that. He wants an easy peace. He doesn't want a hard peace. He wants, he wants Germany to be treated more fairly after the war. He says, if you punish Germany strictly, you're just increasing the odds that Germany's going to try to rise up again in the future. It will create turmoil in Germany, that we need an easy peace. And he talks about democracy and defending democracy and supporting democracy. This is a war to end all wars. And how do we do that? We make the world right. We give the Polish a Poland. If the start of World War I, there is no Poland country. No, there's Polish people. But Germany and Russia touch each other. There aren't the countries in between today, like Poland and Ukraine and Belarus, and so forth. And so he talks about, you know, giving people a say, supporting democracy, you know, fixing a lot of the wrongs that have been caused, how to carve out some of the land in the most fair way to prevent future wars. And perhaps the most important part of the 14th point, of the 14 points, besides the easy peace and not punishing Germany harshly, is the League of Nations, which is a precursor to today's United Nations, which forms after World War II. The League of Nations, which forms after World War I, is this place where he envisions the world's countries can go and discuss problems instead of fighting out on the battlefield. And that this could be a war to end all wars if the League of Nations gets put into place. Some problems with the League of Nations, though, however, is that, for starters, the United States doesn't join the League of Nations. You know, Henry Cabot Lodge fought tooth and nail against that. Woodrow Wilson kind of shut out the Republicans in the formation of this, and Henry Cabot Lodge also was afraid, who's a Republican, was afraid that that America would be losing a lot of its own say, that foreign countries could kind of dictate to us what our foreign policies would be. It might ruin our ability to be isolationists, might ruin some of our self-autonomy. So he fights against this. At the same time, Wilson becomes, you know, he suffers a stroke, and he's severely debilitated, and he can't go around and do the same kind of campaign speeches that Henry Cabot Lodge can. And so America doesn't join the League of Nations, even though an American created it. At the same time, the League of Nations doesn't have a lot of teeth. So when World War II starts to break out, Japan and Germany and Italy, they just simply up and leave the League of Nations. And the League of Nations is kind of almost hapless. I mean, the policies they put in place on Germany, Italy, and Japan for doing the things that they're doing, the aggressions they're taking leading up to World War II, they're just not effective. And so it fails in large part because the United States is not there. It fails in large part because World War II breaks out, because it can't really prevent the war. But, you know, you see Wilson's vision. But here's basically just a brief overview of why we entered the war, some of the important things that might come up. Remember, usually it's to do with, if you look at wars in the AP US History exam, it usually has to do with society, economics, civil rights, things like that. They usually don't really focus on battles, so don't worry about any of that, especially for World War I. Thank you.